Once I had hit like sophomore year especially, my anxiety had just taken root into a sense of my self-image and who I was, which really turned into like depression. I had this deep self-hatred for myself because I kept failing that expectation I was putting on myself, which made me mad at myself.
Yeah.
And mad that I wasn't the best at things, or I wasn't the funniest friend or popular or whatever it was. If I lost a game, I was just basically having panic attacks to where I wasn't able to really do anything, and it led into like a form of self-harm. And it was more because that gave me a sense of control within my life, and it made me forget about kind of what was happening around me. It was something I could do in that moment to like alleviate some pain that I was feeling.
That's a question people will have that I've had myself.
Yeah.
When you say self-harm, is that like a cutting or a...
Yeah, for me it was cutting and burning, so like a lighter. For me, those were my avenues. I've now learned there's so many different ways people do it, but for me that was it was a way that I alleviated my emotions. A way for me to have that kind of sense of control, what I was saying, but also just I liked it. Like, I felt good in the moment. And it distracted me from the feelings, and distracting myself with like a physical pain distracted me from the emotions that I was feeling, and was able to kind of numb out with the emotions instead of still feeling them so strongly. I really realized that I had been self-harming in elementary school I would wear like rubber bands, and I would like flick them on myself. And obviously that seems so minor, but it can really develop into, for me, very unhealthy habits, and more extreme habits that do cause scarring or more permanent pain and different things like that. And so was taking that minor form that didn't look like an addiction into something that was a full-blown addiction by the end of it.
I mean, people do all kinds of crazy things to cover up those feelings. Eating is a form of compulsion. Been there. The snapping, the pinching, cutting, all this kind of stuff. Fascinating. In high school, is there a low point for you in high school, or does that kind of come later?
I think probably one of my biggest low points was when I hit my senior year. My junior and senior, like the beginning of my senior year and into my junior year, I started having these panic attacks in the morning that I'd have to miss school. Like I genuinely could not breathe. And so I wouldn't be able to go to school because I'd just be freaking out, and it wouldn't be over anything in specific sometimes. It was just all this stress that I couldn't deal with very healthily. I don't think that's a word, but in a healthy manner. And so then my senior year, COVID had happened. And so no more school, which I think at the time I was really upset about. I think it had some benefits. But I had gotten into a relationship, and I was at a really vulnerable point. I had a injury to my ankle that caused me to have surgery, and so I was just kind of all over the place. I was really sad, and just not in a great healthy mindset, and so I'd gotten into this relationship and put a lot of my self-worth and value into it, and missed a lot of red flags that were obviously waving, but I just did not see them.
Like, what's a red flag?
Like manipulation. And at first it started off of like little things, or like he would like hyper focus on like, well, what are you doing? Why are you talking to them?
Controlling.
Like very controlling aspects that at first I didn't know. I was like, oh, he just cares. Like, that's why he's asking those things. But it turned into a lot more of the unhealthy of like, I don't want you hanging out with this person, or I think you should do this or do that, whatever it was. And then kind of that summer transition of I had graduated, and I was going into college like that summer. And our relationship had just developed a lot, and I grew up agnostic, so I didn't have the same values that I do have now, but things started getting a lot more physical and physical. And like halfway through the summer, I had been sexually assaulted by him, but I like had said no, like I didn't want to do it. But afterwards, I kind of just blocked it out. And it had happened multiple times after that, but I blocked it out because I thought that was normal. Like that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like that's what relationships are. I was supposed to do this for him or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Even though I did not want to, and I voiced that very clearly that I did not want to. And I blocked it out. And it wasn't until I started college and we had broken up when I really started to realize what had happened.
Yeah.
And it like wrecked my life.
Yeah. If you don't have a great template
yeah.
for what that's supposed to look like,
yeah.
you don't know. And I don't know, in your case, maybe this is true. You sort of rest on media.
Yeah.
You know, oh, they do this on movies.
Exactly.
Therefore,
yes.
You know.
And I had friends that were doing that with their boyfriends,
Right.
but even at the time, I wasn't telling my friends anything that was happening.
Yeah.
And like now looking back, I'm like, that's a red flag. Because I was the type of friend that wanted to brag about her relationship with other people. And I was very like prideful with it.
Right.
And I didn't want to tell anybody because I felt like ashamed about it.
Yeah.
And then going into college was really starting to realize, oh, like that's not what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Like that's not what a relationship is supposed to be like. I was seeing other relationships and I'm like, this looks different.
Yeah.
And really started to kind of come to the conclusion and realizing like what had happened and like what was like starting to happen within my life with that.
I think that's one of the lessons. We have 2 daughters. We try really hard to make sure and teach instinct.
Yeah.
If something in the back of your head says, I don't know why this is wrong.
Yeah.
Just trust it
Exactly.
and move away from whatever that is. And then reflect on it.
Yeah.
Talk about it or whatever.
Yeah. I think when you have that, like remembering I was so uncomfortable in those moments. Like in my gut, I knew that like something was wrong. And obviously like there were other things I was doing that I shouldn't have been doing anyways that were sinful.
Sure.
But like I felt uncomfortable because of what was happening, not because that it was a sin or anything like that, but like there was something in me that was like, this is not right.
Yeah.
Like something is wrong here and I'm not being treated correctly afterwards. And it wasn't until like the relationship was even over that I realized that had happened and like what that even meant for my life.
So what's, to this point, what is your faith like? You mentioned that you were agnostic.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does that look like for you?
So growing up, I never went to church. Like I never asked questions even. I felt like I grew up in the South, but I felt like I wasn't really exposed that much to it. I had gone to like a few youth things with some friends, but I just thought it was like a trend. Like, people go to this on Wednesday nights or Tuesday, whatever night it is. But growing up, there was no praying or like a faith value. Any decision I was making, I was never thinking, I wonder what God says about this, or I wonder what the impactfulness of this. It's just my faith was like a moral compass of like, this is right or this is wrong. It was never, this is what God would say or anything like that. And so
kind of a relativity, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it just feels wrong. Feels right.
And it was very much so of like the societal norms, like, okay, it's wrong to steal and to hurt people or to do illegal things. But like, there are so many things that are sins that we shouldn't do. Like, I didn't feel anything about lying. I would say I was the best liar growing up. Like, I got away with so much. But that's not right. But all my friends were doing, all the people around me. So morally, that wasn't something bad to me. Yeah. It was like, if you could get away with something, honestly, pat on the back to you, props. So it wasn't until I got to college, I was 18, almost 19 that I went to church for the first time. And that's like when I had like kind of started my relationship with Christ and came to faith like a week before I went to church for the first time.
Wow. And that was when you went to college?
Yeah, it was November of my freshman year. Yeah. So towards the end of my first semester, my first semester of college was one of the worst times of my life.
Because you have a story there, right? That first semester. Kind of tell me about that. And awful, you'll have the same story that many freshmen have.
For sure, yes. And so kind of coming out of high school, coming out of this relationship, I decided to go to Texas Tech, which was like 5.5 hours, 6 hours away from home. I was ready to be out of the house. I wanted to be far. And I got to college, and I wanted that typical college lifestyle. I wanted to be something new. I didn't want to be friends with the same people from high school. I wanted to start over, and I wanted to be just Gillian. And I could start over and create this new image away from the anxiety and the depression that I had in high school. Little did I know that was not what happened. So I started drinking a lot, partying, boys, drugs, all the above.
All the stuff.
Yeah, all the different things. And it led me just feeling really, really empty, really alone, and super depressed. Yeah. And at the same time, I was having these realizations of what had happened to me that summer right before college. And I had these friends that I would go out with and drink and party with. But we never hung out when we were sober, really. It was kind of very superficial friendships of they liked party Gillian. But the next day, hungover Gillian wasn't someone they wanted to be friends with, or even just regular, normal Gillian. They didn't really want to, none of us wanted to be friends with each other then. And so I felt really isolated. And it was also COVID at the time still, too, so university just looked different anyways.
Yeah.
But I really just started to break. I had started having panic attacks almost every day. My depression had then turned into a suicidal ideation, where I realized I don't want to be around. Realizing what had happened to me that summer before and just different past traumas that I had been through, I just was done. I didn't want to keep going. I was tired of the drinking and the partying because it was that momentary satisfaction that night, but then the next morning was those were the times where I felt the most alone, and I had nobody to talk to about it or like pursue that with.
Yeah.
And so it was end of October, where I had I created a plan.
Yeah.
I had wrote letters. I had, got the pills that I needed. Everything was kind of in order to like commit suicide and to go follow through with my plan. But the day before, like the night beforehand, I had met this girl who had shared the gospel with me, but I like rejected it. I didn't want like really any part of it.
Yeah.
But there was just like this voice in my head that was like, you should just like text her. Like, this is like your last, whatever. Like, it's going to happen that day. So this is kind of your last little reach out, I guess. And she was an older girl. So I had texted her at like 3 a.m. thinking, oh, she's not going to respond. And then I can just go with my plan, whatever. I forgot that she was a nurse. Like, she's pre-nursing. So she was on a night shift. And she texted me back immediately. And was like, I'll pick you up at like 8 a.m. Like, I'll pick you up.
Now, this is the girl who wanted to share the gospel with you. Is that right?
Yeah, she had shared she shared the bridge with me, is what she had shared. Oh, okay. And I was like 50, I don't know, it was 45 actually. Yeah. I was like, I'm 45% sure I'll go to heaven. She like shared all that with me, and I was like, 45%. Yeah, I was like, I still think I'm good with the 45. Like, I felt confident still walking out of it, which is just, I look back now and I'm like, oh, you were so silly.
Yeah.
So she had shared the gospel with me, so I knew she was a believer. But then when I reached out to her, she picked me up. I wasn't able to drive at that time. I was in a boot. So she picked me up, sat me down. She could just tell there was something off. Like, I wasn't my normal extroverted self, I guess. Like, she would say I was like kind of nervous. And she reshared the gospel with me, but through her testimony. And we had been through such similar things, such similar like past traumas and emotions and feelings and like mental health stuff. And I felt seen. And I heard her talk about these things that I had never heard someone openly admit, like being sexually, whatever it was. Like, I had never heard someone say that out loud. I had never at this point told anybody yet what was going on. And I realized that was God through her. Like, I felt seen by God. And it was in that moment where I was like, I want a relationship with God. Like, everything clicked, and I understood what the difference was between her and I. Because we had been through such similar things, yet I was quite literally knocking at death's door, and she was in love with God and super happy and had this life and like peace about her. And just seeing that, I realized, I was like, I want what you have. And it was God. And I was like, I'm ready. Like, I want to commit my life to God. I want to change my perspective. I want to change my life. And she had said something with me that I'll never forget. I have it tattooed on me now and everything. She had said, like, he sees you. Like, God sees you for you. You don't have to clean yourself up. I thought I was this broken. I am a broken person, but I thought I wasn't enough for God. That I was too broken, too beyond repair for anybody to love me, let alone a God. Like, I didn't even think a human being could love me at this point. I had never felt like people. I knew people loved me, but I never felt it. I didn't think they did. Like, I thought they were lying when they would tell me they would love me.
Well, you've told yourself this lie for
exactly,
so long.
And I had so believed it. And was so immersed of just this self-hatred and I hated my life. And I was so deep into self-harm, and that only intensifies the feelings of you're not enough, or now I'm scarred, and nobody's going to love somebody who's not perfect or scarred, whatever it is. And hearing that and hearing her say that, I literally felt just this warmth around me of just God, like the Spirit just like hugging me and like overtaking me. And that day I was like, okay, I'm committing my life to Christ and I want to change. And it was so sweet. Just, I came from not knowing anything, bought my first Bible. Like, she bought it for me, and she, taught me how to read my Bible, I didn't even know how to pray. I didn't know what that looked like, or if
That's
there
a big
was
deal.
I thought there was like a rubric that you had to like fill in the blanks and all this stuff. And she just walked alongside me in all of my fears and doubts. And I really realized the weight of just the fact that Christ had died on the cross for me, and he loved me so much that he did that. And that's insane. Like, because I was saying, I was like, I've never felt loved, and now I know someone died for me. Like, that was mind-blowing to me. And how would I want to worship any other idol or anything else, any livelihood than that? Like, and so, like I was saying, just really started to pursue him after that, which was just awesome.
That is amazing. Yeah. Is that a difficult transition? So you've come from a place of being agnostic and not really having much of anything, even a desire, right, for that relationship. Is that a tough transition, or does it feel fairly immediate? I'm always curious, these, especially college age transitions. Is it just all of a sudden you're faithful, or?
Yeah. And I think for me, I think there was the immediate of like, I love God and I want to follow him. The excitement and just the pursuit of him. And I still feel that to this day of like, I'm excited to be a follower of him. But at the same time, coming from a background where you don't know much, there was a lot of things that I had no idea were like sinful and were sins that I was still committing. And it wasn't until I would like ask her and I was like, what does the Bible say about drinking or whatever it is? And it wasn't, like 2 months after I was a believer that I stopped drinking because I didn't know. Like I came from a lot of like, I was very naive when it came to it. So I think there was a transition with that, but every time it was, okay, I see what God's saying and I want to follow that. So it's like a lot of just discovery, I think, was a bigger part of it, of discovering what God's word says, and then pursuing and following that. But, there was this deep rooted there were a lot of things I believe growing up that, God speaks outwardly against, or he calls us to live in a different light. And so there was definitely a transition period, but it was full of like a deep love and gratitude for the Lord, and a very much so of like a willingness for that I wanted to pursue. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Well, sure. It's interesting. I think you have God gives you the tools when you're at birth. So things like, oh, I know this is wrong. Yeah. But I don't know why.
Exactly.
I can't put my finger on it, but I just know. Yeah. So I'm going to override it. That's the enemy talking. Exactly. I'm going to override it and say, well, it makes me feel good, so therefore I will just continue doing whatever it is.
Yes. I definitely had to grow discipline and like obedience. That was where I definitely struggled with that. And I think everyone still struggles with different sins in their life or areas of obedience that we're still trying to be more obedient. And there are convictions that come now that other people do that aren't convictions for them, and they're not inherently wrong. Yeah. But God places those convictions on people. And so there was a lot of that, of just trying to like decipher, see what works. Yeah. Sometimes I'd fail at things. And then I would be able to be like, okay, I'm learning, like, God has grace in my life, which I'm so thankful for. But he calls me to live above reproach. And how sweet is it that I have his word, but also a community he's blessed me with around me to hold me accountable for things and pursue me in that fashion. And like when it came to my depression, anxiety, and self-harm, that was hard. Like I got diagnosed with PTSD afterwards. And so started going to therapy, really started to work on what does God say about that in my life. And I think there was a point where after I'd become a believer, I was like kind of mad at God, even a little bit, because I was like, oh, why did all these bad things have to happen to me? I had heard other people who had these stories of like, they, grew up in the church. I was so jealous. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, like I wish I had that. Yeah. But I want to be the person I am today. And I'm so thankful for the things that have happened to me, because I've gotten to talk to so many girls about it. And I would live through every bad moment of my life to get to tell one person. Right. And it impact them. Like God uses our stories and our testimonies and these things that have happened to us for his kingdom and like for his glory. And I think knowing that, like my discipline and obedience just changed completely after knowing that.
What comes next for you in school? You had mission trip, right?
Yeah. So I had gone to Kaleo with Stumo and had really gotten plugged in with this community. And so that next year, I had gotten invited on a mission trip to Southeast Asia for the summer. And going into it, I really felt like God was calling me to go overseas, but I couldn't tell if that was my flesh or if that was God or not. And also I think a lot of times we glorify missions, and there should be so much glory with it, but it is really hard. Like being a missionary is really hard. And so after going to Southeast Asia while I was there, I knew so clearly that God was calling me overseas and wanted me to pursue him in a different culture. And so that's hopefully the next stage for me. That's why I'm working here, is to gain more experience, to help disciple others and love them, so that I can go overseas and continue to do that one day.
Yeah. How was that experience well, you've already kind of described it. Yeah. It's your first real application. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Of your faith?
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. It was the first time, not the first time I'd ever, but it was a really pivotal moment in my relationship with God and understanding my reliance on him. I had realized when I was in the States, I relied on God. But when I was there was there wasn't AC a lot of times. I took bucket showers the whole summer. There's no running water, which is incredibly humbling, I learned. But I had to rely on God in ways that I never thought that I would.
Yeah.
And I felt so close to him and like in his word. And I had never felt closer to him in my life. And I still feel so close to him. And like, but that was a pivotal moment where something changed.
Yeah.
And I realized like, God, I can't be idolizing these other things around me.
Yeah.
Consciously or unconsciously. Like I need to be more conscious of my actions and what I'm doing in obedience with him. And so that was one of my favorite things about going overseas was the amount that I relied on him and the amount that my heart was just broken for people who have no idea who God is. Yeah. Because that was me for so long. I had no idea who he was. And it quite literally saved my life. And like they have no access in so many places where there's access here. Like I grew up with access. I just didn't really see it. But over there, there's no access. Yeah. And so that broke my heart, but also just made me fall in love with God and his calling of like, we're called to go and make disciples of all nations. Mm-hmm. And so kind of just what's the word? Like re-amplifying that or I don't know. I'm bad with grammar, but it's all right. Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was actually from our sermon this weekend. God wants us to be in a position of challenge, which means, that the church that we were talking about in Revelations was, they were living a life of complacency. They had money. They had this earthquake, and they were like, we'll just fix it ourselves. We have everything we need here. And meanwhile, they're not really showing anything in their faith. They're just kind of existing. Yeah. And sometimes I think people think, that's really, if I can just get to that point in my life, I would have said that in my 20s. Yeah. Right. If I could just get to the place in my life where I'm just like, I'm a neutral the whole time. There's no ups, there's no downs. Yeah. I'm just, and in coming from a position of knowing what anxiety feels like in the intense kind of anxiety. Yeah. I just used to think, just stay flatline. Yeah. Stay flatline, just coast. Nothing will hurt you. Exactly. You don't realize that's not what we're called to do.
No, that's numbing out.
We're literally a waste of skin if that's all we're doing is sitting on a couch existing. Exactly. It reminded me of a story in France. There's a church near the English Channel in World War II when the Allies invaded France and were kicking Germany out of France. They took over these churches and they would use them for like medical aid stations. Well, there's this one church where the pews in the church were so bloodied by the end of the church that townspeople wanted to throw the pews out. And the pastor there was like, no, you have to leave these pews exactly the way they are. And they even went to the extent of staining over the blood stains on the pews. They're still there today. Whoa. And his answer to the people in the town was, this place is always going to be a home for the broken. Yeah. And I don't ever want anyone to forget that. And it always has stuck with me when you tell your story. Here's the kind of the amount of pain I was in, willing to end my life, yet I'm washed with grace. Yeah. And now look at me. Exactly. Yeah, it's an amazing story. Yeah.
Kind of what you were saying earlier of like it reminds me of like, this was something someone had told me of like, I think us as people can get really comfortable with where we're at, even whether we're living in sin or not living in sin, wherever we are. But when I was over there, I was super uncomfortable. Like not in the sense of like, I was like scared for my life or anything like that, but I was.
But a lot for you. Yeah. That's the main thing.
Yeah. But it was super different. It was a very third world country. Yeah. But because I was uncomfortable, I relied on God so much. And like my relationship with him grew so much. And every time I look back on my life, when I was very suicidal and wanted to end my life, I was uncomfortable. Yeah. And I grew so much in that moment towards Christ. I was pushed towards him because of that uncomfortability. Yeah. And I think that sometimes when we're uncomfortable, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Like, we rely on God a lot, and so kind of trying to stay from getting too comfortable somewhere.
Yeah. Well, what's the message? When you're really uncomfortable, you get up and move.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the place where you're so uncomfortable. Yeah. That's really what God is saying.
Exactly. You want to be complacent within it.
Yeah. So you are interested in psychology?
Mm-hmm.
Was that right? Tell me a little bit about that. What's going on there?
Yeah. So originally when I was in college, at first I was a biochem major, wanted to be a doctor. I am not surprisingly. After honestly coming to faith, my values really changed, and my reasons for wanting to be a doctor were not of the pure heart. I wanted to have a lot of money.
Yep.
And I was minoring in psychology at the time. I started taking a lot of classes and looking at my own story and the way that I was affected with mental health and how that pushed me towards Christ. And I came to know a beautiful and loving God because I was so broken. It really encouraged me to just pursue psychology as my major. After that, I've gotten to work in some of the most incredible places because of my major, and it partners alongside ministry so well because, unfortunately, mental health is becoming a lot more prevalent and a lot younger of ages than it probably has always been, but it wasn't as openly seen. And so it's a lot of kids these days that are really affected by just these negative emotions, negative thoughts, like attacks from Satan with it. And so after knowing that, that's what really made me want to pursue this within a ministry form of I'm able to use psychology within my ministry, and it's amazing. And I've even been able with my major and just graduating with a psychology degree, like I understand myself so much better, and the way God created me is so cool of how he gave us these emotions, and like all emotions come from God, but how we can honor him with our emotions and how we can deal with our emotions with God. And what he calls us, like when we are sad, like he tells us like he loves us beyond anything else. He tells us we were made in his image. And what a sweet reminder that we can pull away from the negative emotions through his word, through what he says about us, not what the lies of like society tells us. And so,
what's next for you? Hang on. What's next for you here?
Well, I just started working here, so I'm kind of towards the beginning of my residency.
Let me rephrase for that.
Got it.
What's next for you in general?
In general?
Yeah.
The hope is to stay working here for a little bit longer and then hopefully move overseas after that.
Yeah.
It's kind of
You want to move
steps.
overseas?
Yeah. I want to live there for the rest of my life would be optimal.
Do you see ministry as a part of your life going forward, or?
Absolutely. Wherever I end up, I want ministry to be the main focus.
Yeah.
We're called to make disciples and to pursue him in that way and to not add to the kingdom of Christ, but to multiply. And so whether I feel called to go overseas right now and I would love to pursue that full time, but let's say that changes and I'm here and I start working a corporate job or anything like that, I'm still called to make disciples, and I want to make disciples within any context of my life until the day I die, like whatever it is.
Is there a marriage of psychology and ministry at some point?
Right now for me, I think the goal is that hopefully if I move overseas, that I would get my graduate degree over there. And be able to practice and do counseling over there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball. Did you ever come up with an answer? You said you were grappling with the question, why do these bad things happen to good people? That's like the question of the year, every year for every Christian.
For real. Yeah.
Did you ever encounter an answer?
I felt like I did. And I think what happened is I had met a girl who was younger than me, who was not a believer, and she had told me some things that had happened in her life.
Yeah.
And she came to faith because God is good and God uses our testimonies. And even though those bad things happened to me, it got to be used for such good things. Like, even bad things do happen, but they aren't what define us. And like, God uses things that happen in our lives for his glory and for good. And at the time, it's hard to realize that.
Yeah.
Because at the time when those things were happening to me, if you would have put me senior year of my summer going to college, I'd have been like, this sucks. Like, I hate this. And it did suck. And I do still hate it. But everything happens for a reason, whether I know what's going on or not. And now I'm 22 years old. That happened when I was 18. I'm 22 years old now. And I realized that though that was bad, it was probably one of the best things that happened in my life because it pushed me so much closer to God. Yeah. And it needed to happen for me to understand how broken I was and how I couldn't do something on my own. I realized I couldn't fix my problems. I was using self-harm as a way to cope with it. That is not the correct answer. Yeah. It does. Anyone listening, that does not work. But Christ does. Jesus dying on the cross and paying that debt for us, that's what works. And that's what is true in everybody's life. And so, I may not have the exact answer of why bad things happen, but I know that God uses everything. And maybe it's not for me to always know all the answers.